Welcome to the adventure of the mechanical manservant, a Sherlock Holmes adventure from the series The Clockwork Conspiracies. Sherlock Holmes and the Age of Innovation, playing in the year 1895. London, indeed the world, was ablaze with innovation. Electricity turning night into day, horseless carriages rattling upon the cobbles. This age of innovation, as some termed it, presented my friend Mr. Sherlock Holmes with challenges unlike any before, mysteries intertwined with the very marvels and mechanisms reshaping our lives. These accounts, which might be called the Clockwork Conspiracies, chronicle his navigation through the dark currents beneath the gleaming surface of progress. Allow me, then, to begin this series with a most peculiar affair, one that tested the very boundary between man and machine. I shall recount for you the adventure of the mechanical manservant. Chapter. The November fog pressed close against our Baker Street windows, its grey tendrils swirling like ghosts in the gaslight. Within, the familiar comfort of our sitting room was punctuated only by the crackle of the fire and the distant, muffled rumble of hansom cabs navigating the slick cobblestones below. Holmes had been sunk in one of his profound silences for the better part of the afternoon, lost in the chemical analysis of some obscure residue. When the sharp summons of our doorbell cut through the quiet, Mrs. Hudson ushered in our visitor, and I confess I was somewhat taken aback. It was not often that Scotland Yard sent emissaries after dark, and rarer still that they arrived in the form of Inspector Evelyn Hardcastle. She was a woman of keen, intelligent features, her practical attire somehow accentuating rather than diminishing her authority. She carried herself with a brisk confidence, though tonight I detected a faint shadow of strain beneath the professional veneer as she nodded a greeting, her gaze sweeping briefly over Holmes's chemical apparatus before settling on him. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, forgive the intrusion at this hour, but I have encountered a matter of singular peculiarity," responded Inspector Evelyn Hardcastle. Holmes, who had looked up with an air of mild annoyance at the interruption, now straightened in his chair, a flicker of interest replacing his languor. He gestured towards the armchair opposite. "Pray be seated, Inspector. Peculiarity is the lifeblood of my profession. What mystery brings you from the yard on such a dismal evening?" Sherlock Holmes noted. Inspector Hardcastle settled into the chair, removing her gloves with deliberate movements. The firelight caught the determined set of her jaw. "It concerns Sir Reginald Harcourt, the industrialist. He was found deceased this morning in his study at Harcourt Manor," answered Inspector Evelyn Hardcastle. "Good heavens, Harcourt! Strangled, was it not, according to the early editions?" commented Dr. John Watson. A slight tightening around the inspector's mouth suggested my observation was premature. "Indeed, Dr. Watson, strangled. The peculiarity lies not merely in his death, but in the circumstances. The study door was locked from the inside. The windows were securely fastened, also from within. There is no secret passage, no hidden entrance we have yet discovered," Inspector Evelyn Hardcastle said. Holmes leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "A classic locked room puzzle, and the occupants of this sealed chamber," explained Sherlock Holmes. Inspector Hardcastle paused, her voice dropping slightly, taking on a tone of careful neutrality that barely masked an underlying tension. "Sir Reginald and his new mechanical valet," Inspector Evelyn Hardcastle replied. I stared, utterly bewildered. A mechanical valet. The newspapers had been full of Professor Flemming's controversial invention, a clockwork automaton designed for domestic service. But murder. Ah, Fleming's automaton. Tell me, Inspector, does this mechanism possess the requisite dexterity for strangulation? Remarked Sherlock Holmes. His question was sharp, devoid of the astonishment I felt. His interest was clearly piqued, not by the impossibility, but by the mechanics of it. "That is the crux of it, Mr. Holmes. It is remarkably lifelike, capable of numerous tasks, but capable of murder. My colleagues are skeptical. They seek a hidden human agent naturally, yet the room remains stubbornly locked," answered Inspector Evelyn Hardcastle. Her voice remained level, but I sensed the professional frustration beneath the surface, the difficulty of presenting such an outlandish scenario to conventional minds. Holmes leaned forward, his eyes glinting. "Skepticism is the precursor to discovery, Inspector. Now pray tell me the body's position, the state of the room, any marks upon the mechanism itself. And the key was it found?" "Where?" stated Sherlock Holmes. Inspector Hardcastle's account was concise yet detailed, her observations razor-sharp. Holmes listened with rapt attention, his occasional questions about the automaton's capabilities or the lock's nature cutting through her narrative like a scalpel. As she concluded, Holmes sprang to his feet, pacing before the fireplace. The ancient floorboards protested softly beneath his restless tread. A man strangled in a locked room with only a machine for company. A machine designed by Flemming, whose ambition perhaps outstrips his caution. Fascinating, utterly fascinating, deduced Sherlock Holmes. He stopped pacing and turned abruptly towards the inspector, his eyes alight with the thrill of the chase. "Inspector, you were right to bring this matter to me. The Yard may search for hidden panels and human culprits, and perhaps they shall find them. But I suspect the truth lies intertwined with the very wires and gears of this mechanical marvel. Watson, prepare your Gladstone. We shall visit Harcourt Manor at first light tomorrow. I must see this murderous automaton for myself," Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. Following Inspector Hardcastle's departure, a heavy silence settled upon our Baker Street rooms. It was a quiet broken only by the soft hiss of the gaslight and the low, distant rumble of London traffic filtering through the window panes. Holmes, however, seemed energized by the baffling circumstances presented. Within the hour, the clatter of hooves and wheels announced our hansom cab, which soon deposited us before the imposing stone facade of Harcourt Mansion. It stood a grand but somber edifice, veiled in the afternoon mist. The air hung thick with the damp scent of earth and the pervasive aroma of coal smoke. A liveried footman, his face a mask of professional gravity, admitted us with barely a sound into a hall dominated by shadows and the loud, funereal ticking of an unseen grandfather clock echoing in the stillness. Our footsteps were muffled by thick carpets as we were shown directly to the late Sir Reginald's study. It was a substantial room, lined with towering bookshelves that smelled faintly of old leather and pipe tobacco. Despite the grim event that had transpired, an unnerving orderliness prevailed. Inspector Hardcastle, true to his methodical nature, had preserved the scene meticulously and relayed his initial findings. The heavy oak door locked from within, key still in place. The tall windows overlooking the rain-slicked garden securely fastened. No sign of forced entry. The victim, Sir Reginald, had been found strangled near his desk, his position now marked by a stark chalk outline on the plush carpet. Beyond this immediate area, and an overturned, dried inkwell, nothing appeared disturbed. In the center of the room, near the heavy mahogany desk and the chalk outline, stood the object of our immediate interest, the mechanical valet. It was a remarkable construction of polished brass and steel, standing perhaps a foot shorter than a man. Its articulated limbs were poised in an attitude of silent readiness, its glass eyes vacant, yet disconcertingly watchful in the dim light. No hum or whir emanated from it. It was utterly still. Holmes strode purposefully towards the automaton, his keen eyes darting from joint to rivet. I surveyed the scene, noting with surprise the lack of disturbance around the body's outline on the carpet. Only an overturned inkwell near the desk hinted at any struggle. The door and windows confirmed Hardcastle's report secure, untouched. Droplets occasionally tapped against the glass. Locked from the inside, Watson, no apparent ingress or egress. And yet a man lies strangled. Our silent sentinel here is the sole companion to the deceased. remarked Sherlock Holmes. Astounding, Holmes. A truly perplexing situation. The machine itself appears entirely passive. Dr. John Watson inquired. He knelt beside the automaton, the fabric of his coat rustling slightly, peering intently at its base and the floor beneath. No scuff marks indicative of a struggle involving this machine, he murmured, his voice low, tracing a finger along the pristine carpet nap. It appears rooted to its designated spot. At that moment, the study door opened with a soft click, admitting Lady Beatrice Harcourt. She was younger than I had anticipated, dressed in mourning attire, the dark fabric rustling as she moved. Her clothes accentuated her pale complexion and dark, intelligent eyes. Her composure was remarkable. Only a slight tremor in her clasped hands betrayed any inner turmoil. Her voice, when she spoke, carried a hint of strain beneath its cultured tones, yet held an unexpected edge of keen interest that cut through the quiet room. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, thank you for coming so promptly. Inspector Hardcastle assures me your unique talents are precisely what this situation requires," remarked Lady Beatrice Harcourt. "Madam, your husband's death presents features of unusual interest. May I ask, were you familiar with the operation of this device?" Sherlock Holmes said. Her gaze shifted to the automaton, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes, not fear precisely, but perhaps calculation. Only generally. Reginald was most enthusiastic about Professor Flemming's creation. He demonstrated its basic functions, of course. "Tell me, Mr. Holmes," her tone sharpened slightly, acquiring a more technical precision, "how secure are its control mechanisms? Could it, for instance, be activated or manipulated remotely? And what safeguards prevent it from deviating from its programmed routines?" Lady Beatrice Harcourt said. The questions struck me as oddly specific for a grieving widow, betraying a depth of inquiry beyond casual curiosity. Holmes regarded her intently, his expression unreadable. "Those are pertinent questions, Lady Harcourt. The answers may lie partly with the inventor, Professor Flemming, and partly," he gestured subtly towards the automaton's chest panel, "within the machine's own intricate workings. I observe a small, almost imperceptible scratch near the primary control dial. Did Sir Reginald mention any recent malfunction or adjustment?" remarked Sherlock Holmes. "Not precisely a malfunction. He merely commented last night that he intended to refine its responsiveness this morning." Her voice remained level, betraying nothing. Lady Beatrice Harcourt said. Holmes made no immediate reply, turning back to the silent metal figure. The automaton remained utterly still, absorbing the light rather than reflecting it. Lady Beatrice offered a polite, strained smile and excused herself, pleading the need to make arrangements. Her footsteps faded down the corridor, followed by the soft, distant click of another closing door. Holmes remained contemplative, his eyes fixed on the impassive brass face of the mechanical marvel. The silence in the room felt heavier now, charged with unanswered questions about intricate mechanisms, both human and mechanical. Only the grandfather clock's ticking seemed to penetrate the quiet. "Remote manipulation, Watson," he mused, almost under his breath, the sound barely disturbing the quiet. An interesting line of inquiry for a lady ostensibly unfamiliar with the machine's deeper functions, and a convenient mention of a planned adjustment. There is more to this than a simple Larktroom puzzle. We must delve deeper into the nature of this automaton's control, explained Sherlock Holmes. Indeed, Holmes. Her technical knowledge seemed quite pronounced for mere general familiarity. "Most curious," commented Dr. John Watson. "The interview with Lady Beatrice Harcourt had left a curious residue in my mind, a sense of questions asked with an almost unnerving technical precision." Holmes, however, offered little immediate comment as our hansom clattered away from the imposing Harcourt residence, the rhythmic clip-clop of the horse a stark contrast to the turmoil within. His thoughts, as ever, were racing far ahead. Our destination the following morning was Scotland Yard, where an appointment had been arranged with Inspector Hardcastle. The very air of the place seemed thick with the methodical bustle of investigation. The insistent, rhythmic clatter of telegraph machines formed a constant undercurrent to a low, urgent murmur of voices, and the steady tread of boots on the worn floorboards. Inspector Hardcastle received us in a small, functional office. Papers were stacked neatly on her desk, and the sharp scrape of her chair sounded as she rose to greet us. Her voice, when she spoke, was crisp and businesslike, matching her demeanor of focused energy and her sharp, direct gaze. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, thank you for coming. I felt it pertinent to share some recent intelligence which may, or may not, bear upon the Harcourt affair," Inspector Evelyn Hardcastle said. "Indeed, Inspector, pray continue," stated Sherlock Holmes. Hardcastle leaned forward slightly, the fabric of her sleeve rustling against the desk, her voice lowering confidentially, losing none of its official crispness. "We've seen a marked increase in activity from a group styling themselves the Clockwork Gang. They specialize in thefts of a peculiar nature, not jewels or cash, but highly specific mechanical and electrical components, precision gears, miniature gyroscopic stabilizers, and most recently, several sets of advanced remote actuators," replied Inspector Evelyn Hardcastle. At the mention of remote actuators, I saw Holmes's eyes quicken with a sudden, sharp interest, though his posture remained deceptively languid. "Remote actuators. Forgive my ignorance, Inspector, but what precisely are those?" responded Dr. John Watson. She paused for a moment, gathering her thoughts, then explained patiently, though with an undercurrent of professional gravity. "Devices allowing for the control of machinery from a distance, Doctor. Uncommon things, requiring significant technical skill to utilize. The gang seems unusually adept. We believe they may be planning something significant, perhaps related to industrial sabotage, but their targets have been varied," said Inspector Evelyn Hardcastle. "And have any of Sir Reginald Harcourt's business rivals suffered similar component thefts, or perhaps employed individuals known to associate with this Clockwork Gang?" Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. Hardcastle consulted a folio, the sharp crackle and rustle of paper distinct in the quiet office, her brow furrowed in concentration. Her finger tapped the cover of the folio twice, a sharp, decisive sound. "Sir Reginald's dealings were complex, Mr. Holmes. Aggressive, some might say ruthless. He built his empire swiftly, often absorbing or dismantling competitors. There was the recent hostile takeover of Atherton Automatics, which caused considerable resentment, and whispers of a dispute over patents with a consortium of German clockmakers. He certainly made enemies, disgruntled inventors, rival firms he undercut, former partners left by the wayside. We are looking into all potential links, but nothing concrete connects them to these specific component thefts, not yet. The sophistication of the stolen items suggests a purpose far beyond simple industrial espionage or petty revenge," responded Inspector Evelyn Hardcastle. "Sophistication, yes, and actuators allowing for remote control, most suggestive. Thank you, Inspector. You have given us considerable food for thought," deduced Sherlock Holmes. The clamor of Scotland Yard faded, replaced by the familiar sounds of 221B Baker Street. Holmes paced before the fireplace, his fingers drumming a restless rhythm on the mantelpiece. Outside, a persistent drizzle had begun, slicking the pavements and blurring the gaslights, their low hiss barely audible through the window panes against the gentle patter of rain. He turned suddenly, his eyes alight, his expression animated. "Watson, consider the facts. A man is strangled in a locked room. The only other occupant is an automaton of uncanny sophistication. Its inventor is known, but its precise capabilities are not fully disclosed. The victim's wife displays an unusual technical interest in its controls and vulnerabilities. And now, we learn of a gang stealing the exact sort of specialized components, particularly remote actuators, that might allow for external influence over such a machine. Sherlock Holmes pointed out. He paused, letting the implications hang heavy in the air, the silence broken only by the soft, insistent ticking of the clock and the gentle patter of rain against the glass. Good heavens, Holmes. Are you suggesting this Clockwork Gang could have controlled the automaton remotely, turned it into some ghastly murder weapon? Dr. John Watson commented. It is a distinct possibility demanding investigation, Watson. The parts Hardcastle described are not for simple clockwork toys. They speak of advanced control systems. If such a system existed within the valet, and if someone possessed the means to activate it remotely, well, it provides a mechanism where none seemed possible. Lady Beatrice's pointed questions now seem less like naive curiosity and more like deliberate probing for weaknesses. Sherlock Holmes said, the idea was both ingenious and deeply unsettling. A machine turned murder weapon by invisible strings. I felt a distinct chill despite the warmth of the hearth. However, we must not leap ahead. We are dealing with speculation built upon conjecture. We need facts, Watson, hard facts regarding the automaton's actual design and potential vulnerabilities. There is only one man who can provide them with certainty, Sherlock Holmes pointed out. Professor Flemming, wondered Dr. John Watson. Precisely, Watson. Our next step must be a visit to the workshop of its creator. We must ascertain if such remote manipulation is merely a theoretical fancy or a chilling, practical reality, deduced Sherlock Holmes. The prospect hung before us, an interview with the man who had breathed mechanical life into the central figure of this dark puzzle. What secrets, I wondered, the ticking clock seeming to mark the moments until discovery, did Professor Flemming hold concerning his creation? Inspector Hardcastle's news about the Clockwork Gang and their interest in remote control devices was disturbing. Holmes declared our next stop must be the inventor himself, Professor Augustus Flemming. Soon we stood before his cluttered workshop. The sharp smell of machine oil and hot metal filled the air, a strong contrast to the foggy street outside. Inside, we heard rhythmic ticking and soft whirring, the sounds of invention. Professor Flemming opened the door. His thinning hair looked constantly ruffled, as if by his own racing thoughts. Behind thick glasses, his eyes darted nervously between Holmes and me. Tools were scattered everywhere, amidst brass gears and copper wires gleaming under the gaslight. A faint smell, like after a lightning strike, hinted at recent electrical work. Professor Flemming, we intrude upon you at a difficult time, I know. We require your expertise concerning the automaton currently held at Harcourt Hall, observed Sherlock Holmes. Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson. Yes, a dreadful business, truly dreadful. The constable informed me. My creation, implicated. It seems utterly impossible, Professor Augustus Flemming said. His voice was tight, higher than expected, revealing deep anxiety. It was more than just professional worry. He wrung his hands, his eyes drifting to a large shape covered by a tarpaulin in the corner. Its capabilities, Professor. We must understand them precisely. Sir Reginald spoke of its advanced nature. Was it merely programmed routine or something more? Declared Sherlock Holmes. It has a special kind of mechanical brain. It can understand complex orders, even adapt to new situations. Up to a point, it learns. But murder, no. It's built with safeguards against harming anyone. Professor Augustus Flemming replied. He gestured towards a complex schematic pinned to a board, a bewildering array of lines and symbols. For maintenance, I built in a way to check on it remotely. Like a wireless checkup. I could assess it, even update its programming from my workshop using special codes. Very secure, of course. only meant for me. Holmes leaned closer, his keen eyes narrowing. The professor's mention of remote access, in light of Hardcastle's report on the stolen actuators, struck a chord of significance. Remote access, Professor, using wireless transmission. And could this interface, perhaps, be used not merely for diagnostics, but for instruction, for control? Sherlock Holmes said. Flemming went pale. He stumbled back against a workbench. A small tin of screws clattered to the floor, but he paid them no mind. That's a possibility I only recently discovered. A flaw. The security is strong, Mr. Holmes, very strong, but. Yes, with the right kind of signal, the right equipment, someone could possibly send commands directly, bypassing the normal controls. It would take special knowledge. Knowledge no one else should have, said Professor Augustus Flemming. His voice trailed off, his gaze becoming distant, troubled. The air in the workshop seemed suddenly colder. I never imagined. I pushed the boundaries, yes, but the potential for misuse. There have been inquiries, unsavory elements showing interest in my work. There were whispers, rumors of certain parties, not just competitors, but darker elements seeking my designs. Industrial espionage, I assumed. But this possibility of direct control for harm, Professor Augustus Flemming replied. He gestured vaguely, a man clearly tormented by the implications of his own genius. The pride in his creation warred visibly with a profound fear of its perversion. You identified this vulnerability, Professor, yet you delivered the automaton to Sir Reginald. Why? Sherlock Holmes pointed out. It seemed like such a small risk, almost impossible. Sir Reginald wanted the automaton urgently. The payment was essential. I planned to fix the flaw, create a safeguard. I needed more time, said Professor Augustus Flemming. Holmes straightened up, his eyes sweeping the workshop, lingering for a moment on the dusty, untouched tools near the tarpaulin-covered form. Time, Professor, is precisely what Sir Reginald ran out of. You have been most helpful. Watson, our inquiry must now turn to who else might have understood the value and the vulnerabilities of Sir Reginald's prized possession. Sherlock Holmes pointed out. We left the professor standing amidst his marvels and his fears, a man caught in the gears of his own making. As the heavy workshop door clicked shut behind us, echoing slightly in the narrow street, Holmes's words confirmed my own thoughts. The intricate web surrounding the mechanical manservant was drawing tighter, and its strands seemed increasingly likely to lead us back to Harcourt Hall itself, and perhaps to the grieving widow. The heavy oak door closed behind us with a soft thud. Inside Harcourt Mansion, opulence mingled with somber atmosphere. Beeswax and lilies scented the air, a funereal perfume that chilled me despite the crackling fire. Lady Beatrice Harcourt awaited us, poised upon a velvet chaise longue. She was a vision in mourning black, yet her eyes held a sharpness that suggested little true grief. The ticking of a grand regulator clock against the far wall seemed to measure the silence between us. Your ladyship is most gracious to receive us again on such short notice. Our investigation proceeds, you understand, and certain points require clarification. Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. Her voice was smooth, controlled, like polished marble. Of course, Mr. Holmes. Anything I can do to assist in bringing Reginald's killer or demonstrating the malfunction of that contraption to light. She gestured vaguely, a dismissive wave towards the unseen study. Lady Beatrice Harcourt said. Holmes leaned forward slightly, his gaze intent. The firelight flickered across his hawk-like features. Precisely. The contraption, as you call it. Professor Flemming spoke of its intricacies. Your late husband's passion for such mechanisms was well known. But I confess, I was intrigued to learn of your own long-standing interest and involvement in his technological ventures. Not merely a passive observer, I gather, replied Sherlock Holmes. A subtle tension entered her posture. She adjusted a lace cuff, her movements precise. Reginald valued my opinion, Mr. Holmes. He sought my perspective on his project's practical applications and marketability. I assisted with correspondence and attended demonstrations. One absorbs knowledge. Is that so unusual? Responded Lady Beatrice Harcourt. Not unusual, Lady Beatrice, merely noteworthy, particularly regarding the automaton's control systems. You possessed more than a layman's grasp, I believe. Familiar, perhaps, with the diagnostic interface Professor Flemming mentioned, even its potential vulnerabilities, observed Sherlock Holmes. Her eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. She met his gaze directly, a challenge glinting within their depths. Reginald discussed many things. Security was naturally a concern with such an advanced device. We spoke of safeguards, yes. He mentioned a remote access point for diagnostics, but assured me it was perfectly secure. A husband's reassurances, however, Lady Beatrice Harcourt answered. Her voice trailed off, leaving a clear impression that perhaps she hadn't fully trusted her husband's confidence. It was the first hint of friction we had encountered. Holmes shifted his attention, seemingly casual, towards a small writing desk near the window. Upon it lay several books. One, distinctly technical and bound in dark green leather, lay slightly askew. "Indeed, may I?" replied Sherlock Holmes. He did not wait for a reply, but stepped over, picking up the green volume. He opened it near the middle, where a thin paper marker lay. Advanced Pneumatics and Differential Engines, 3rd edition. And bookmarked, I see, at Chapter 7. Remote Actuation and Override Protocols. Your studies have been most specific, Lady Beatrice. Sherlock Holmes pointed out. He held the book out slightly. Tucked within the marked pages, almost invisible, was a faint indentation on the paper. It looked like the ghost of a hastily erased pencil notation, right next to a diagram of wireless signal transmission. Her composure finally wavered, a slight flush rising on her cheeks. She answered sharply, "I wish to understand the nature of the machine that was in the room." "Is that a crime?" said Lady Beatrice Harcourt. His voice remained level, almost gentle, yet carried an undeniable weight. "Not a crime, madam. Merely an indication of a remarkably focused, technically informed curiosity. A curiosity that seems to have arisen even before your husband's demise. This section details precisely the type of remote access flaw Professor Flemming feared could be exploited. It even discusses theoretical intercept vectors," declared Sherlock Holmes. He closed the book softly, the sound echoing the finality of his observation. Lady Beatrice pressed her lips together, saying nothing more. The air crackled with unspoken accusations. Holmes replaced the book exactly as he had found it. "Thank you for your time, Lady Beatrice. You have given us much to consider," Sherlock Holmes noted. Outside, the grey London drizzle had begun, tapping softly against the carriage windows as we drove away. The rhythmic clatter of the horses' hooves on the wet pavement filled the silence. "Holmes," I ventured, "her knowledge, that book. Do you believe she?" remarked Dr. John Watson. He stared out at the passing street lamps, his expression thoughtful. "She possesses the knowledge, the motive, and a coolness of nerve that is quite remarkable, Watson. She understood the machine's vulnerabilities, perhaps even became aware of others who sought to exploit them. This shadowy Clockwork Gang Flemming hinted at. But knowledge is not deed." His voice took on a decisive edge. "Before we weave the widow's web any tighter, we must understand the foundation upon which Harcourt built his empire and the pressures surrounding it. Our next step lies within Sir Reginald's business affairs." "Drive on, cabby, to Threadneedle Street," explained Sherlock Holmes. The carriage lurched forward, carrying us away from the shadowed elegance of Harcourt Mansion and towards the bustling, grimy heart of the city, leaving the widow and her secrets behind us, for now. Following our unsettling interview with Lady Beatrice, Holmes declared our next course lay not within the melancholic confines of Harcourt Manor, but amidst the bustling, impersonal heart of the city. Our hansom rattled over the cobbles, the rhythmic clip-clop a counterpoint to the low, insistent hum of London's commerce that grew louder as we approached the financial district. The air here felt different, charged with the silent passage of immense sums, thick with the scent of ink, ledgers, and ambition. Sir Reginald Harcourt's offices were imposing, reflecting the scale of his industrial empire. Holmes, however, bypassed the grand mahogany desks, requesting access to the employment ledgers and project costings for the past 2 years. Hours passed, Holmes, immersed in these figures. "What precisely are you searching for amidst this sea of ink?" remarked Dr. John Watson. We spent what felt like hours immersed in columns of figures and terse notes. The only sounds the dry rustle of paper and the distant, muted roar of Cheapside traffic filtering through the tall windows. His voice, when he finally spoke, was sharp, cutting through the quiet industry. "Observe, Watson. Harcourt's push towards automation was aggressive, even ruthless. Here and here again, entire departments rendered obsolete almost overnight. Note the dates. They coincide precisely with the final development phases of Fleming's Mechanical Man," remarked Sherlock Holmes. "Good heavens, Holmes, the severance paid is insultingly small. Is this the value Harcourt placed on years of service?" commented Dr. John Watson. "Precisely, Watson, and with such cost comes consequence. Resentment is a powerful motivator. Let us see where this discontent has festered." "He snapped the ledger shut with a decisive thud," remarked Sherlock Holmes. Our investigation shifted dramatically. Leaving the polished brass and hushed tones of the city behind, we ventured into the labyrinthine streets of Lambeth. Here, the air was thick with coal smoke and the clangor of unseen workshops. Voices were louder, rougher. The very stones underfoot seemed grimier. We sought out men whose names appeared in Harcourt's ledgers, men displaced by the relentless march of his automated future. In dimly lit public houses, amidst the clatter of tankards and coarse laughter, we found fertile ground for resentment. "Tell me, sir, your thoughts on your former employer, Sir Reginald Harcourt, and his innovations," Sherlock Holmes noted. An elderly foreman, his hands permanently stained with machine oil, looked up from his pint, his expression hardening. His voice was thick with bitterness. "Harcourt, I built his fortune on our backs, he did. Then tossed us aside like worn-out cogs for his metal monstrosities. Talked of progress. He did. Progress for who, eh? Not for the likes of us," said displaced worker. Another, younger man, his face etched with worry, added, his voice tight. "And that Professor Flemming, sharp as a tack, but unsettling. I heard things, mind you, just whispers from lads who worked on the early prototypes, secrets about how those contraptions could really be controlled." Displaced worker answered. Holmes leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with sudden intensity. "Watson, we must pursue this thread," Sherlock Holmes responded. And pursue we did, relentlessly. From one informant to another we moved, each name leading us closer to our quarry, each piece of information more specific than the last. The pattern of unrest was clear, but Holmes, I could see, sought one particular piece to complete the puzzle. Finally, in a cramped tenement room, the air stale with the smell of boiled cabbage, we found our man. He perched nervously on the edge of a rickety chair, eyes constantly darting towards the door, twisting a threadbare cap in his hands. He clearly feared repercussions. He provided the link we sought, speaking of a former engineer dismissed months prior after a fierce argument with Harcourt regarding safety protocols, specifically concerning remote access failsafes on Fleming's prototypes. He spoke in a low, conspiratorial tone, barely more than a whisper. "Names Sealer's Croft. Clever fellow, Croft. Knew Fleming's designs backwards and forwards, especially the wireless bits. Harcourt wouldn't stand for being questioned, not by Croft, not by anyone. Sacked him on the spot." "Gone," informant replied. As we emerged back into the gaslit street, the distant chime of Big Ben tolling the hour, Holmes stopped beneath a flickering lamp. "Sealer's Croft," he mused, his voice crisp in the damp air. An engineer intimately familiar with Fleming's work, particularly the remote systems, and harboring a significant grievance against Sir Reginald. The unrest we uncovered provided the fertile ground, Watson, but Croft potentially holds the key. If anyone possessed the technical knowledge and the motive to exploit the automaton's vulnerability from afar, it is he. Sherlock Holmes responded. Holmes turned, his gaze fixed towards the west, in the direction of Harcourt Manor. His point was clear. Our inquiries into the societal ripples, the widespread discontent, had led us directly to the individual wave, Sealer's Croft, who possessed both the technical skill and the deep-seated motive to strike back at Sir Reginald by manipulating the mechanical manservant. The who and the why of a potential external manipulation seemed established. So Croft had the means and the motive, but how do we prove he acted upon them, Holmes? How do we find the how? Dr. John Watson inquired. Precisely the question, Watson. We must return to the scene. His voice lowered slightly, charged with anticipation, and search for the physical traces that such remote interference would inevitably leave behind. The how, my dear fellow, awaits us within those walls, deduced Sherlock Holmes. Following our inquiries into the ripples of discontent spreading from Harcourt Industries, Holmes insisted upon an immediate return to the scene of the crime itself. The chill air of Sir Reginald Harcourt's study seemed to cling to us as we re-entered, the heavy oak door closing behind us with a soft thud. Outside, the late afternoon fog pressed against the window panes, muffling the sounds of the city to a low, mournful drone. The mechanical valet stood silent in the corner where we had last seen it, a sentinel of polished brass and steel, its glass eyes lifelessly reflecting the dim gaslight that hissed softly from the wall fittings. The room retained an oppressive stillness, the scent of old paper and beeswax mingling faintly with something colder, more metallic. Holmes wasted no time on preliminaries, moving directly towards the automaton with that peculiar, bird-like intensity that always signaled a fresh scent on the trail. Dropping to his knees upon the Persian rug, he produced his powerful lens, his breath misting slightly in the cool air as he scrutinized the base of the metal figure. A low exclamation escaped him, sharp enough to make me start. He beckoned me closer without looking up. Following his pointing finger, I knelt beside him and peered through the lens he offered. There, almost invisible against the dark metal, near a cleverly concealed seam I hadn't previously noted, were faint, powdery smudges of dark gray. Graphite, Watson, microscopic traces, but unmistakable, not dust or workshop debris. No, this indicates repeated contact with an electrical connector or specialized tool inserted here into a hidden port, observed Sherlock Holmes. He rose then, pocketing his lens, his gaze sweeping the room before settling on the tall window overlooking a narrow side alley. He crossed the floor, the soft tread of his boots the only sound breaking the stillness, save for the distant, melancholy hoot of a barge on the Thames. Kneeling again by the window, he ran his long, sensitive fingers over the polished floorboards just beneath the sill. I heard the faint rasp of his fingernails against the wood grain. And here, faint but clear marks. Look at the pattern, it matches the feet of a small device, perhaps on a tripod. Someone stood here, Watson, or placed equipment here for some time. Stood right here, focused on the automaton across the room. Sherlock Holmes responded. He straightened up, his eyes alight with the fierce glow of understanding. He gestured from the window towards the mechanical valet, then back again, connecting the separate clues with an invisible thread of logic. The impossible, locked room is no longer impossible. The valet was not acting of its own will, nor was the murderer physically present within these four walls at the moment of Sir Reginald's death. The mechanism was controlled remotely, Sherlock Holmes said. To underscore his point, Holmes approached the silent figure. He took hold of one of its brass arms, testing the movement at the shoulder joint. It swung smoothly, silently, a testament to its fine construction, yet utterly lifeless without direction. Capable of immense strength or delicate precision, Watson, but only when activated by the correct signal. Otherwise, merely an elaborate statue, deduced Sherlock Holmes. Remotely, but how, Holmes? The door was bolted, the windows secured, Dr. John Watson said. Precisely. The graphite suggests an external tool was used, connected briefly to this hidden port, perhaps quickly reached from outside this window, or even through a small opening from another room, just long enough to start the command. Alternatively, Sherlock Holmes noted, he glanced towards the fog-laden window, his voice dropping slightly. A focused signal, sent right through that glass, could trigger a known weakness in Fleming's remote system. A flaw perhaps known only to its creator, or to those who might secretly study his work. Such a signal could bypass the safety controls and direct the automaton's actions from a distance, Sherlock Holmes pointed out. He gestured towards the still figure. Its potential for movement, for precise and powerful action, was chillingly clear. Yet, Holmes's discovery shifted the focus. It wasn't the machine's own ability that mattered most, but the outside hand guiding it. The locked door, the empty room, these were just tricks, made meaningless by the unseen control from afar. The impossibility vanished. The silence returned, heavier now with this new understanding. The locked room mystery had unraveled, replaced by a new question. Who had the knowledge and equipment to commit such a technologically advanced murder? The disgruntled engineer remained a suspect, but the sophistication suggested a more organized, more daring culprit. Our next step is clear, Watson. We must find the source of this remote control, the hand that held the device. The technology is advanced, custom-made perhaps, explained Sherlock Holmes. He turned towards the door, his voice regaining its usual briskness, his footsteps echoing slightly on the polished wood as he moved. We must look for those known to deal in illegal devices and stolen ideas, circles where Professor Flemming's designs might be desired, copied, or misused. Our path leads towards the shady characters mentioned in the factories, towards this so-called Clockwork Gang. It is time we looked into their strange interest in advanced machines, stated Sherlock Holmes. Holmes's eyes gleamed with renewed vigor as he examined the graphite traces and faint marks beneath the window. What was once mere speculation, the theory of remote interference, now stood before us as tangible proof. The Clockwork Gang, Watson, he had declared, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of the chase. Their known interest in advanced mechanics, their shadowy methods. It aligns perfectly. We must delve into the underworld, see what threads we can unravel concerning their recent activities. Our quest led us from the relative comfort of Baker Street into the labyrinthine alleys east of Aldgate. The air grew thick with the smells of coal smoke, stale beer, and damp brickwork. Distant shouts echoed between tenements, while the rumble of heavy drays over cobblestones provided a constant, low accompaniment to our brisk footsteps. Our first port of call was a dingy public house, the Leaky Tap, its air blue with acrid pipe smoke. Holmes, adopting a rougher mien, exchanged coded words with a shifty-eyed man nursing a pint in a dark corner. The informant, known only as Sealers, was a gaunt figure in a threadbare coat far too large for his frame. He spoke in a low, conspiratorial rasp, his gaze darting nervously towards the door between sentences, his ink-stained fingers constantly polishing the handle of his pewter mug. "Aye, the clockwork lot. Right busy they are. Word is, they're after something proper big, something newfangled, mechanical, heard whispers. 'Bout that Flemming feller's metal man," answered informant Sealers. He offered little more, save for a name, ticker, Timms, supposedly a cog in the gang's lower workings. This led us deeper still, to a warren of workshops near the docks where the clang of metal upon metal was a ceaseless, deafening noise. We found Timms, a wiry man whose face seemed perpetually smudged with grease, his surprisingly nimble fingers deftly manipulating some dubious-looking engine parts. He oversaw the repair work with a harried expression. Cornered and perhaps intimidated by Holmes's sharp questioning, Timms proved more forthcoming, though his voice was tight with fear, almost a squeak. "Look, Governor, I only caught whispers, see. They carbled together. A flicker box, they called it, for sending signals, to trip the override, yeah, on that posh clockwork valet. Plan was for night afore last, just gone midnight. Freeze it stiff, get inside sharpish, nick the valuable bits. Clean job, it was meant to be," responded informant Timms. "A remote device, you say, designed specifically to exploit this override flaw. And the timing, man, the precise timing, that is crucial," observed Sherlock Holmes. "Meant to be dead on the hour. 12:15, they reckoned. Use the box. Through the study window, like. Trigger the flaw, stop the contraption before anyone twigged." Informant Timms replied. As we retreated from the grimy workshop, the sounds of hammering fading behind us, Holmes walked in thoughtful silence for several minutes. The fog was beginning to curl in from the river, muffling the city's already subdued sounds. "Watson, the implications are startling. The gang's scheme, whether successful or not, furnishes us with the very linchpin we sought. Their intention was to manipulate the automaton via remote means at precisely 12:15, observed Sherlock Holmes. "But surely, Holmes," I interjected, my brow furrowed in confusion. "Sir Reginald had already met his demise by that hour," responded Dr. John Watson. "Precisely so, Watson. The sequence is paramount. The murder was committed just prior to the gang's intended interference. Our killer knew of the automaton's vulnerability. They anticipated the Clockwork Gang's interest, perhaps even their exact schedule. The crime scene was staged to incriminate the machine, the killer secure in the knowledge that evidence of external tampering would likely appear shortly thereafter. A masterful stroke of misdirection, using a technological scare to conceal a very human act of murder. The gang's criminal enterprise, quite unintentionally, served as the perfect cover for the killer's design," replied Sherlock Holmes. "The audacity of it struck me. The cold calculation required to use one crime to camouflage another was chilling indeed. The Clockwork Gang, focused solely on theft, had inadvertently served a murderer's dark purpose. The path forward is illuminated, Watson. We must pay a visit to Professor Flemming without delay. As the machine's creator, the architect of its fatal flaw, he holds the key. He must surely possess some knowledge of how this critical secret found its way into the grasp of the underworld," deduced Sherlock Holmes. He hailed a passing hansom, the horse's hooves clopping smartly on the wet street. We climbed inside, leaving the shadowed underworld behind us, but carrying its dark secrets towards our next encounter. Following our grim discoveries concerning the Clockwork Gang's intentions, Holmes insisted we pay another visit to Professor Flemming. The fog had lifted somewhat, but a damp chill still clung to the air as our hansom clattered through the streets towards the inventor's workshop. The rhythmic clip-clop of the horse's hooves on the wet pavement seemed to beat out a measure of impending revelation. We found Professor Flemming amidst a familiar chaos of brass fittings, coiled wires, and half-assembled mechanisms. The air hummed faintly with the sound of some unseen electrical apparatus, punctuated by the soft, insistent ticking of countless clockwork devices. Flemming himself looked haggard, his eyes shadowed, his usual energetic air replaced by a profound weariness. He turned from a workbench littered with blueprints, a small, intricate gear held delicately in his forceps. His voice was strained, lacking its usual resonance. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, to what do I owe this unexpected return?" Professor Augustus Flemming said. Holmes wasted no time on pleasantries, his tone sharp and direct. Professor Flemming, we have ascertained the precise nature of the vulnerability in your mechanical valet. An override mechanism triggered by a specific sequence of sonic pulses designed, I suspect, as a failsafe, observed Sherlock Holmes. Holmes paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the humming air of the workshop. A failsafe known to others. Flemming visibly flinched. The gear slipped from his forceps and clattered onto the wooden bench, the small sound echoing in the sudden silence. He did not stoop to retrieve it, instead sinking onto a nearby stool, his shoulders slumped. He spoke heavily, his gaze fixed on the floor. You know, then, yes, a security protocol, a way to disable the automaton remotely should it ever malfunction catastrophically or fall into the wrong hands, Professor Augustus Flemming said. He gestured vaguely at a complex diagram pinned to the wall, his hand trembling slightly. I thought it essential, said Professor Augustus Flemming. Essential, perhaps, but fatally compromised. We have learned that the Clockwork Gang possessed detailed knowledge of this system, Professor. They intended to use it to immobilize the valet and plunder its workings. Sherlock Holmes pointed out. Flemming looked up, his expression a mixture of horror and dawning comprehension. A low groan escaped him. The gang, how could they possibly? His voice trailed off, then returned with pained realization. Unless, he paused, his brow furrowing. Davies, my former assistant, disgruntled, brilliant. I dismissed him 6 months ago for carelessness with volatile chemicals. Flemming's eyes widened. He would have known the theoretical framework, perhaps even seen early schematics. Another pause. Or industrial espionage. Harcourt had rivals who would stop at nothing, replied Professor Augustus Flemming. The means are secondary for the moment, Holmes interrupted coolly. The fact remains, Professor, that a flaw you designed, however well-intentioned, became the instrument, or at least the opportunity, for a crime. The gang planned their attempt for the very night Sir Reginald died, explained Sherlock Holmes. Flemming buried his face in his hands, his voice muffled but thick with emotion. I knew there were risks. Creating something so advanced, something that mimics life, the potential for misuse. It haunted my waking hours, answered Professor Augustus Flemming. He sighed deeply, the sound almost lost amidst the workshop's mechanical chorus. But the potential for progress, for aiding humanity. I convinced myself the safeguards were sufficient. Surely you cannot hold yourself entirely responsible, Professor, I interjected, moved by his evident distress. You could not foresee the actions of criminals, remarked Dr. John Watson. Flemming raised his head, his eyes glistening. Can I not, Doctor? Is it ethical to create a key if one knows that lock-pickers exist in the world? To build a weapon, even for defense, knowing it might be turned against the innocent, replied Professor Augustus Flemming. His voice cracked slightly, the ticking clocks seeming to mark the seconds of his anguish. I built a man of metal and wires, Holmes, but I fear I overlooked the oldest flaw of all, the fallibility and avarice of human men. It is a terrible burden I have wrought, remarked Professor Augustus Flemming. He fell silent. The persistent ticking and humming of his creations filled the air like mechanical heartbeats in the quiet workshop. Holmes stood observing him, his expression unreadable. The detective's long fingers tapped together rhythmically, a thoughtful frown creasing his brow. His voice, when he spoke again, was softer, more contemplative. A burden indeed, Professor, and yet the Clockwork Gang's plan was merely to disable and rob the automaton. Their timing provides a crucial window, but it does not fully align with the moment of Sir Reginald's death, stated Sherlock Holmes. He paused, turning his penetrating gaze from the distraught inventor towards me. Someone else, Watson. Someone else understood that window of opportunity far more intimately. The implication hung heavy in the air, thick with the scent of machine oil and regret. Fleming's confession had confirmed a vital link, yet Holmes clearly saw beyond it, perceiving another layer of calculation entirely. Our investigation, far from concluded, was merely shifting its focus to the final, intricate gear in this deadly mechanism. The heavy damask curtains were drawn against the Baker Street fog, muffling the ceaseless rumble of cabs upon the wet pavement below. Inside, the air was warm. Before the hearth, where flames crackled and hissed with cheerful energy, Sherlock Holmes sat hunched in his armchair, the sharp lines of his face thrown into stark relief by the firelight. Professor Flemming's troubled confession regarding the automaton's vulnerability and the Clockwork Gang's likely exploitation of it still echoed in my mind. Yet, Holmes's profound stillness suggested he saw beyond the inventor's remorse and the gang's crude intentions. "So, Holmes," I began, breaking the silence that had settled between us, "it seems clear the Clockwork Gang intended to use Fleming's flawed design. But Fleming himself believes they merely sought to steal the machine, not commit murder," commented Dr. John Watson. Holmes unfolded himself from the chair, his movements precise and deliberate. He began to pace before the fire, his slippered feet making scarcely a sound upon the worn rug. A log shifted and settled in the grate with a soft thump, sending up a brief shower of sparks that momentarily illuminated his thoughtful expression. "Fleming is correct, Watson. The gang's primary objective was theft, not murder. Industrial sabotage is their métier. Murder, too clumsy, too direct for their usual operations. No, they sought the mechanism, not the man's life. But their plan, their timing, provided the perfect cover for one who did seek Sir Reginald's demise," Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. He stopped pacing and fixed me with that intense gaze that always preceded a significant revelation. "Consider Lady Beatrice Harcourt, ambitious, intelligent, and standing to gain immeasurably from her husband's death," Sherlock Holmes responded. He paused in his pacing, turning towards me, the firelight catching the intensity in his eyes. "We know she possessed more than a passing interest in his business affairs, including his technological acquisitions. Recall Sir Reginald's private ledger we examined in his study back in Chapter 5, the one filled with his cryptic notes on intercepted competitor communications. Specifically, those entries hinting at attempts to acquire automaton schematics. Yes, the ledger with the marginal notes about CWG attempts. I remember," Dr. John Watson said. "Precisely. Lady Beatrice, privy to her husband's methods and likely his filing systems, would have recognized those initials and the patterns. It is my firm deduction that she used his own decryption keys, found amongst those very papers from Chapter 5, to decipher further communications between members of the Clockwork Gang," stated Sherlock Holmes. He tapped a long finger against his temple, his voice low and conspiratorial. "She learned not only of their intent to infiltrate the house and access the automaton, but the exact window during which they planned to make their attempt," replied Sherlock Holmes. As the audacity of the scheme dawned on me, a distant foghorn moaned from the Thames, its mournful cry underscoring the chilling calculus Holmes had laid bare. "Good heavens, Holmes. You mean she knew when the gang would try to trigger the automaton?" remarked Dr. John Watson. "She knew their window," he confirmed, his voice dropping slightly, taking on a harder edge. "And she acted first, while the gang was likely still positioning themselves, preparing their own, perhaps more sophisticated, attempt to control or disable the valet for theft. Lady Beatrice used her knowledge, perhaps employing a cruder, single-purpose device derived from partial schematics, to activate the automaton's fail-safe aggressive protocol," Sherlock Holmes noted. He drew a sharp breath, the implication hanging heavy in the air between us. "The fatal command. Sir Reginald was strangled by his mechanical servant mere moments before the gang could execute their own plan," replied Sherlock Holmes. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the quiet room. the only sound the steady tick-tock of the mantel clock measuring the seconds. The gang's subsequent, inevitably clumsy attempt would then appear to be the primary event, the cause of the commotion and the death. They created the perfect temporal smokescreen, unwittingly, for Lady Beatrice's cold-blooded murder. She exploited their crime to mask her own. But the locked room, how did she activate it from outside? Dr. John Watson said. Ah, that relates to Fleming's admitted security oversight and the signal transmission. We observed traces of near the study window evidence we gathered earlier, Sherlock Holmes pointed out. He gestured dismissively, as if the technical detail were elementary once the motive was clear. A focused signal, Watson, capable of penetrating walls, aimed precisely. She did not need to be inside. She merely needed proximity and the correct frequency, information likely gleaned from those same intercepted plans or her own technical investigations. Sherlock Holmes noted. He clasped his hands behind his back, his posture radiating a sudden, decisive energy. The pieces align, Watson. Motive, opportunity, and the means cleverly disguised by the actions of others. Now we must arrange the final act. His voice grew sharp, resonant with purpose. We shall gather all parties at the Harcourt residence. It is time to demonstrate precisely how this intricate deception was achieved and let the gears of justice grind towards their conclusion, deduced Sherlock Holmes. A frisson of anticipation ran through me, the crackling fire suddenly seeming less comforting and more like a prelude to the coming storm. The confrontation promised to be a complex and potentially dangerous affair, requiring Holmes's utmost skill to navigate. The atmosphere within the grand drawing-room of Harcourt Mansion was thick with unspoken tension. Outside, a steady November rain lashed against the tall windows, each gust of wind rattling the panes like skeletal fingers. Gathered under the oppressive gaze of Sir Reginald's portrait were Lady Beatrice, composed yet watchful, Professor Flemming, his face etched with anxiety, Inspector Hardcastle, alert and professional, and two rough-looking individuals I recognized as members of the infamous Clockwork Gang, flanked by constables. And in the corner, silent and still, stood the mechanical valet, the gleaming fulcrum upon which this entire grim affair turned. A log shifted in the hearth, crackling and hissing as it sent a shower of sparks upwards, the only sound besides the drumming rain and the heavy ticking of the ornate mantel clock. My friend stepped forward, his voice cutting cleanly through the strained silence. "We are assembled," he began, his eyes sweeping across the room, "to unravel the final threads of this most unusual case. The death of Sir Reginald Harcourt was initially perplexing. A locked room, no apparent entry, and only his mechanical servant present," Sherlock Holmes pointed out. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Lady Beatrice shifted slightly in her chair, the rustle of her silk dress unnaturally loud in the quiet. "The key," Holmes continued, "lies not within the room, but without." He turned sharply to Professor Flemming. "Your creation possessed a hidden vulnerability, did it not? A remote override, designed for maintenance perhaps, but susceptible to external activation." Sherlock Holmes noted. The inventor swallowed hard, his voice strained. "A failsafe. Yes, but the frequency was obscure, the mechanism complex. I never conceived," answered Professor Augustus Flemming. "Conceived that others might discover it," Holmes interjected smoothly. "As these gentlemen did," stated Sherlock Holmes. He inclined his head towards the captured gang members. The larger of the two glowered, while the other shuffled his feet, the sound scraping coarsely on the polished floor. Their sullen silence seemed only to confirm his words. "You planned to use this override, did you not? To activate the valet remotely, have it unlock the study from within, and then make off with Professor Flemming's designs, precisely at midnight on the night of Sir Reginald's death," replied Sherlock Holmes. Inspector Hardcastle spoke then, her tone crisp. Their surveillance confirmed their presence near the grounds, Mr. Holmes, and fragments of a signaling device matching the professor's schematics were recovered nearby, corroborating the attempted theft evidence we reviewed thoroughly in Chapter 7. Responded Inspector Evelyn Hardcastle. Indeed, an attempted theft, Holmes emphasized, turning his piercing gaze upon Lady Beatrice. But Sir Reginald was murdered before midnight. Someone else knew of this flaw, the very flaw indicated by the graphite, and those recovered signal fragments, someone with access, motive, and the cold calculation to exploit the impending chaos. Someone whose presence is suggested by those faint indentations we discovered on the study floor, Watson, Sherlock Holmes said. His gaze remained fixed on Lady Beatrice for a moment longer, the accusation hanging heavy in the air. Then, turning back towards the automaton, he reached into his coat. "Allow me to demonstrate." He produced a small, intricate device, reconstructed based on those very fragments recovered near the grounds, the crucial evidence we examined earlier. This emits the precise frequency. Observe. With a distinct click, he activated it. A low hum emanated from the device, and with a faint whir of gears, the automaton's hand moved smoothly, its metallic fingers extending towards an imaginary lock. A sharp, collective intake of breath echoed in the sudden stillness. Professor Flemming looked aghast, while even Inspector Hardcastle raised an eyebrow. Holmes deactivated the device. A heavy silence fell over the room as the implications of his demonstration sank in. The signal could be sent from outside the study, activating the valet to perform complex actions, even lethal ones. This explains how the room remained locked, yet the murder occurred. You, Lady Beatrice, learned of the gang's plan, perhaps intercepting their clumsy communications. You realized their imminent attempt provided the perfect smokescreen. Sherlock Holmes noted. Holmes paused, allowing the implication to sink in. His focus sharpened, pinning Lady Beatrice under his scrutiny. Using your own knowledge, or perhaps a device procured through less savory channels, you triggered the valet before they could, silencing your husband and ensuring your inheritance. The gang's subsequent failed attempt merely served to muddy the waters, Sherlock Holmes pointed out. Lady Beatrice rose, her composure finally cracking, her voice trembling with fury. This is preposterous, an outrageous accusation based on circumstantial nonsense, replied Lady Beatrice Harcourt. Is it? Holmes countered, his voice like flint. Then perhaps you can explain the traces of exotic insulating resin, identical to that used in this override transmitter, found on the gloves in your private safe, explained Sherlock Holmes. He let the question hang in the air, the ticking of the mantel clock suddenly seeming louder. Lady Beatrice paled visibly. Or the coded message intercepted between yourself and a known supplier of illicit technological components, dated 2 days before the murder, replied Sherlock Holmes. The color drained from Lady Beatrice's face. Her eyes darted towards the door, but Inspector Hardcastle stepped smoothly into her path. Lady Beatrice Harcourt, the inspector stated firmly, I am arresting you for the murder of Sir Reginald Harcourt. Constables, secure her, and take these two into custody for conspiracy and attempted theft, remarked Inspector Evelyn Hardcastle, as the arrests were made amidst a flurry of protestations and the heavy tread of police boots. A sudden, heavy silence descended, broken only by the relentless drumming of the rain against the glass. My gaze fell upon the automaton. It stood impassive, a marvel of engineering that had become an instrument of calculated murder. The rain continued its relentless drumming, washing the grime from the London streets, but inside Harcourt Mansion, the stain of betrayal and technological overreach felt indelible, leaving a profound disquiet hanging in the air. The aftermath of the Harcourt case left a peculiar silence in its wake, a void filled only by the insistent crackling of the hearth in our Baker Street sitting room and the low drumming of rain against the window panes. Inspector Hardcastle, having concluded her official duties for the evening, had accepted Holmes's invitation to join us, a rare concession that spoke volumes of the case's unsettling nature. The air hung thick with unspoken thoughts, the scent of damp wool mingling with Holmes's familiar shag tobacco, and the faint aroma of wet pavement drifting in from the street. Her voice, usually crisp and official, held a note of weariness. A grim business, Mr. Holmes. Lady Beatrice possessed a chilling resolve to exploit Professor Flemming's invention, not merely for theft like those clockwork ruffians attempted, but for calculated murder. It speaks to a particular darkness. Inspector Evelyn Hardcastle answered. Holmes, who had been staring intently into the flames, shifted in his armchair, the wicker groaning faintly beneath him. He tapped the ash from his pipe into a nearby tray. Indeed, Inspector, the true vulnerability was not merely mechanical, but human, replied Sherlock Holmes. He paused, letting the firelight flicker across his sharp features. Fleming created a marvel of engineering, yet failed to adequately consider the ease with which its control could be usurped. That remote access, unsecured, was the key, the very element Lady Beatrice required to enact her plan whilst maintaining the illusion of the locked room, remarked Sherlock Holmes. He leaned forward, his eyes bright with analytical fervor, gesturing with his pipe stem. It demonstrates a principle, Watson, applicable far beyond clockwork men. Any powerful tool, if its control is not rigorously secured, becomes a potential weapon in the wrong hands, stated Sherlock Holmes. He tapped his finger lightly on the armrest for emphasis. The more complex the technology, the more subtle and dangerous the avenues for misuse, stated Sherlock Holmes. And Professor Flemming, I asked, breaking the brief silence. What becomes of him and his creation? Asked Dr. John Watson. Inspector Hardcastle sighed, the sound barely audible above the hiss and pop of the burning coals. Flemming is distraught, naturally. He sees his life's work twisted into an instrument of death. As for the automaton, it is currently evidence, replied Inspector Evelyn Hardcastle. She glanced towards the rain-streaked window before continuing. Its future, however, raises difficult questions. Can such a thing exist without inviting misuse? We shall certainly need regulations, oversight, answered Inspector Evelyn Hardcastle. Regulation follows innovation, often too slowly, Holmes observed, his tone sharp. Replied Sherlock Holmes. He rose from his chair and took a step towards the mantelpiece, resting an elbow upon it. The potential exists, Inspector. Automata capable of complex tasks, perhaps even reasoning, are on the horizon. This case is merely a prelude, deduced Sherlock Holmes. He turned back, his gaze sweeping over us. The ethical tightrope Fleming walked, balancing progress against consequence, is one society itself must now navigate, remarked Sherlock Holmes. He gestured towards the window. The gaslight outside flickered, sending long, distorted shadows dancing across the room, as if to underscore the uncertain future Holmes spoke of. Is the mechanical valet a sophisticated tool or a nascent intelligence capable of being directed to harm? Sherlock Holmes pointed out. He paused, letting the question hang in the air, punctuated only by the crackle of the fire. It performed the act, yet Lady Beatrice held the strings. It blurred the line, demonstrating how technology can obscure intent and agency, stated Sherlock Holmes. A thoughtful pause hung in the air before she spoke. Your insights have been invaluable, Mr. Holmes. Scotland Yard is indebted to you. This case will undoubtedly fuel debate for years to come, replied Inspector Evelyn Hardcastle. She rose, gathering her coat. The rustle of the heavy fabric seemed unusually loud in the quiet room. I must take my leave. Good evening, gentlemen, Inspector Evelyn Hardcastle said. Holmes and I saw her out. The sound of her firm footsteps receded down the stairs, followed by the heavy click of the front door shutting, leaving us once more to the solitude of our rooms and the dying embers in the grate. A gust of wind rattled the window pane. "Progress, Watson," Holmes murmured, his voice barely above a whisper as he resumed his place by the fire, "is a double-edged sword. Man's ingenuity, it seems, constantly outpaces his wisdom." Sherlock Holmes responded. He fell silent then, lost in his own reflections, steepling his fingers beneath his chin. The weight of the case, the questions it raised about the future we were hurtling towards, seemed to settle upon us. I reached for my dispatch box and pen. This strange and troubling affair, the adventure of the mechanical manservant, deserved careful chronicling, not merely as a puzzle solved, but as a cautionary tale for an age teetering on the brink of unprecedented change.